have a feeling that some of you are going to be mad I'm even comparing these two GPUs, but it's completely fair. They currently cost about the same amount of money. The RTX 3050, well, let's just pop in here and I will show you. I am not making this up. So if we go to PC Part Picker, which, I understand that you can find better quick deals on other places, but if you're just searching a lot of major retailers, and again, we're talking new prices here, not used, then PC Part Picker surveys a whole bunch of major retailers, and you can sort prices high to low, get an idea of what the overall market looks like. And slide over out of the way here. And let's look here. So if I search RTX 3050, sort price low to high, the absolute cheapest model available is $300. Now the MSRP on this card is supposed to be $270, I believe it. No, $250, right? I forgot. Anyway, but it's just not there. Occasionally you can find one at that price, but it's incredibly difficult to do. And in general, they've usually been sitting at $320 to $330 at most retailers for a long time. This has been consistently the price for the RTX 3050. Now, if we look at the RX 6600 XT, its price has been falling over time and has finally reached a point where it's roughly the same price as an RTX 3050. So in this video, I bought the ASRock Challenger DOC version here, and it's $310, although admittedly, that is factoring in a $20 mail-in rebate. If you don't count the mail-in rebate, then it is true this would be $330. However, again, if we do look at the RTX 3050s, most RTX 3050s are actually around that price. This one's a bit of an outlier, although technically we could say that there is one available for a bit less now. So yes, maybe the RTX 3050 does cost a bit less if you compare the current lowest model. I'm not trying to hide that. But again, if you factor in the mail-in rebate, it is basically the same price. So the nearest price competitor to the 6600 XT is the RTX 3050, not the RTX 3060. The RTX 3060, if we look, is actually up here at $380, and that's for an MSI Ventus model, which looks like it's not requiring a rebate or anything like that. So yeah, it's looking like $380. So if we're comparing which GPU is the nearest price competitor for the 6600 XT, it's not the 3060, it's the 3050. So now that we've established that, if you look at just the relative performance of these cards, we have the RTX 3050 set as a baseline here at Tech Power Up. Now this isn't perfect, and I'm gonna slide out of the way again here. But you've got to scroll up quite a ways. Now the RX 6600 is almost 30% faster, but guys, we're not talking the 6600, we're talking the 6600 XT. A lot of people don't realize that the XT version is significantly more powerful than the non-XT version. And I'll do a head-to-head of those coming up here pretty soon. And I will also compare it to the 3060. But anyway, what we're seeing here is that it's a 54% performance jump according to Tech Power Up. But what does that really mean? And honestly, in different games, that can be very different. And what a lot of you will be thinking is, well, this isn't taking into account ray tracing and DLSS and all of that. So in these head-to-head benchmarks, we are going to look at the ray tracing performance, and we'll start with that. I'll give you the best case scenario for the RTX 3050, but then we'll also look at non-ray trace performance and the utter bloodbath that entails. At the end, I'll give you some final thoughts. Let's jump right in. All right, let's do our best to make this even slightly interesting and give the RTX 3050 its best shot at keeping up with the 6600 XT. Let's use ray tracing, where we know that Nvidia's Ampere architecture has a massive advantage over AMD's RDNA 2 architecture. However, Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p native resolution, with the ray tracing set to low, both GPUs get too low of performance for me to really consider using it realistically. However, Between the two, if we have to declare a winner, when in reality I like to declare them both losers, the 6600 XT is actually winning here. Now, the side-by-side performance actually gives us a couple other interesting things to look at. We can look at the power draw, where it looks like it's pretty even, although the 6600 XT does seem to be drawing a little bit more power here than the RTX 3050 and delivering more performance, for that slight extra power draw here. And the coolers of both cards seem to be keeping up just fine at around 60 degrees. We can see here in the averages that this was definitely a win for the 6600 XT. Now, so if you are going to try to use any sort of ray tracing on these cards, even at 1080p, you'd probably have to upscale, and I don't think the image quality loss for upscaling is really worth it, especially using FSR 1.0. But DLSS quality, some people might find it acceptable at 1080p, but you can see here what's interesting is that that's actually only allowing the RTX 3050 to basically catch up to the native resolution performance of the 6600 XT, and that's even with ray tracing enabled. If we allow FSR 1.0 at the UltraQuality setting, then the RX 6600 XT actually takes a big lead here and is the only one actually offering performance that I would consider worth using. However, the image quality hit from FSR 1.0 at low resolutions like 1080p, in my opinion, is a little bit too blurry to really be worth using, especially considering that RT low in this game is actually only offering some soft shadows in local scenes. It is not a mind-blowing change to the overall image quality, and so yeah, in my opinion, definitely not worth it, although that's the only configuration here that got a well above 60 FPS average. Now, I should mention that not every ray tracing setting or game hits the hardware exactly the same way. And I've noticed that ray traced reflections, especially in a game like Cyberpunk, tend to offer such an Nvidia advantage on just how the hardware supports it, however it's encoded, whatever, that this is the place where we do see the 3050 take a small lead. However, notice that both GPUs are having to upscale here even to get to frame rates that somebody might consider sort of playable. Although once again, I don't think that using any ray tracing, at least in Cyberpunk, makes any sense on either of these GPUs. I just thought we'd start with ray tracing performance as an interesting comparison. Like, if somebody wanted to argue what would make the RTX 3050 actually somehow try to compete with the 6600 XT, I think they would argue ray tracing performance. And, well, you can see here that maybe it's slightly better if you're specifically talking about ray traced reflections. The game Guardians of the Galaxy also gives us another look at ray traced reflections, and this game is much easier to run than Cyberpunk. The ray traced high setting is actually the lowest ray tracing setting in the game, and it is ray traced reflections. The ray traced max setting has just better quality ray traced reflections and reflections on transparencies. We can see here once again that the RTX 3050 has a lead in ray traced reflections performance. Although I should also mention that the footage looks choppy from AMD here. For some reason in this game, specifically recording at 1080p especially, my AMD GPUs give me choppy footage, although the actual gameplay on the screen looked a lot better. And let's leave out ray tracing and look at why the RTX 3050 in everything other than ray tracing is getting absolutely crushed. So 1080p Ultra settings, the 6600 XT can even handle a crazy demanding and or unoptimized, however you want to look at it, title like Cyberpunk. This should give us an idea of what future more demanding game performance might be like. The RTX 3050 has to turn down to the medium settings to stay more consistently above 60 FPS, but if we allow the 6600 XT to go down to 1080p medium settings, we can see that at those settings, even in incredibly demanding games like Cyberpunk, it's really a high refresh rate GPU. So, the 6600 XT, even in demanding games, is 1080p Ultra 60 FPS in the most demanding titles. In less demanding titles, it's high refresh rate 1080p Ultra, or in the demanding titles like this, you just turn down the settings a little bit if you want a really high refresh rate. And again, the 3050 is just can offer a decent experience here, but it just really is completely outclassed. If we try the high settings rather than the medium or the ultra, we can see the 6600 XT do very well at native. And I was curious if people were like, okay, the other reason we might go for the 3050 is, well, I'm just going to use DLSS all the time. And if I'm using DLSS, surely the RTX 3050 beats the 6600 XT at native. And what we're seeing here is actually no. It's almost able to tie the 6600 XT native performance when using DLSS quality. And is getting crushed when we compare the native performance here. But even if you were going to be one of those people who's like, I think DLSS looks even better than native, which trust me, at 1080p and in motion, it certainly does not look better than native. Occasionally you'll get a game with horrible TAA where certain elements of the image, especially when you're not in motion, look a little bit better than native. But, you can see a lot more artifacting. The YouTube compression is probably going to kill most of it. But if you see these in person, things like those palm tree branches, lines in the pavement, things like that, certainly look more artifacted, not as good when using DLSS quality as the upscale. So it's not free performance. And it still didn't get it to catch up, which is what we're going to see here again at 1440p. Now, I don't think either of these GPUs is ideal for 1440p, but if you were considering them for 1440p, the 6600 XT 1440p medium in a really demanding title like Cyberpunk is able to deliver perfectly rock-solid performance. You could go up to high settings if you're willing to use some upscaling. Again, FSR 1.0 here. I know this game has a FSR 2.0 mod, but it's not officially supported in the game, so I'm not going to include it in the video. Most people aren't going to go through the hassle of modding it. And then the RTX 3050 here, it's interesting once again where the same quality settings using DLSS is only able to just kind of barely get a tie with actually a small loss compared to the 6600 XT at native resolution. And that's even despite the fact that NVIDIA's Ampere architecture does tend to scale to higher resolutions better than AMD GPUs relatively. The performance gap tends to go more NVIDIA favored as you head in the higher resolution directions. Now, I don't think you'd want to buy either of these for 4K, but I know some people will hook up their PC to their 4K TV sometimes, whatever. So I thought I'd try to target 60 FPS medium settings for 4K here, but the 3050 just couldn't do it. Even allowing DLSS UltraPerformance as the upscale here, which is as aggressive as it gets, with FSR 1.0 on the 6600 XT, I just had to go to the quality setting, which I think is upscaling from 1440p. DLSS UltraPerformance is below 1080p, I forget the exact number, and trying to upscale to 4K. And you can see, especially if you're actually on a 4K screen, but even if you're below it, there's a lot more image instability and aliasing, like to the fencing here and things like this on the NVIDIA side. Look at the lines in the pavement, things like that. The UltraPerformance upscale is just asking way too much, and it doesn't look very good. I would much prefer the 6600 XT here, although like I said, admittedly, the 4K results here are mostly pointless for these GPUs other than some like niche use cases. Now, let's go back to Guardians of the Galaxy, but this time, let's not use ray tracing. This tends to be an NVIDIA-favored game. So GPUs between AMD and Nvidia that usually perform about the same as each other on average would usually give a bit of a lead to the Nvidia GPUs here. But even in an Nvidia-favored title, we see the 3050 getting beat pretty heavily at both 1080p and 1440p ultra settings, although it is able to deliver playable 1440p ultra settings, which is kind of nice to see, and definitely solid 1080p ultra settings. But again, that doesn't change the fact that the 6600 XT is outperforming it. So how about Red Dead Redemption 2? Well, at the 1080p max settings, the 3050 cannot maintain 60 FPS even in this easy indoor scene, and as we step outside, it gets much, much worse, which means we'd want to look at optimized settings. So I chose the optimized settings from the Hardware Unboxed YouTube channel. They did a series of 2 videos, very good performance gains with not much lost image quality. And we can see here that that does mean that 3050 can certainly handle this game at 1080p with the settings turned down. But if you then compare the turned down settings on the 6600 XT, they're just delivering an extremely high refresh rate experience, whereas the optimized settings for the 3050 are just getting you a small lead over the maxed out performance of the 6600 XT. So this is once again a title where it's really just not even close. It's a hands down victory for the 6600 XT over the RTX 3050. I know, maybe it's getting a little boring, but let's go up to 1440p and see what happens. So the 6600 XT at 1440p max settings in an easy interior scene like this is able to stay at around 60 FPS, but it will dip below it in more demanding scenes and as we step outside. So at 1440p, the 6600 XT could certainly use the settings turned down a little bit. The 3050 I didn't even try out at the max settings. I tried the optimized settings, which it's interesting to me that the optimized 1440p settings are kind of matching the native 1440p max settings of the 6600 XT. Whereas on the 3050, this game does feature DLSS and not FSR, so I figured, you know what, let's allow that. Let's kick that on here. But the optimized settings with DLSS are actually still getting crushed by the optimized settings at the native resolution on the 6600 XT. I've noticed that this game doesn't gain as much performance from DLSS as a lot of other games do. And if you say it gains more when you run it in DirectX 12 instead of Vulkan, I tested that out on my 2070. I haven't tested that on all my GPUs, but the performance boost was about the same. So let's look at Horizon Zero Dawn. And here we're seeing 1080p Ultra and 1440p Ultra, although on the 3050, I once again allowed it to use DLSS on the 1440p Ultra in order to just try to hit 60 FPS, whereas the 6600 XT was able to deliver 1440p Ultra well above 60 FPS without needing any kind of upscaling. This game does feature FSR 1.0, but I just don't think we needed it here. And I will admit that DLSS does certainly look better than FSR 1.0. But like I said, even using DLSS, the 3050 does not even catch up to the 6600 XT. So let's look at God of War. And here we're looking at a DX11 title, and we've got 1080p Ultra and 1080p Ultra with the shadows turned down to high. You can see that that offers a large performance boost for both GPUs. That's the most demanding setting here. And by doing that, the 3050 can almost get to 60 FPS, but actually still doesn't quite make it. Whereas the 6600 XT with the shadows down to high is offering quite solid frame rates. Although I will mention that depending on which part of the game you're looking at, the performance can dip quite significantly. As he picks up the log here and then walks forward, this scene here is more typical of the game, and we'll see that the 6600 XT with the shadows down is still able to be over 60 FPS, while the 3050 is well below at these settings. You can see the shadow differences between the characters. Now, this game does feature FSR 2.0, so we could take a look at it here. Now, unfortunately, when I was testing these, I actually meant to capture them both using DLSS Quality and FSR 2.0 UltraQuality at... Sorry, that FSR 2.0 is a mistake. There is no UltraQuality setting. It should just be Quality. My mistake on the caption there. Anyway, notice that the 6600 XT is at the Ultra baseline, whereas the 3050 is using the original settings as a baseline here. So if you want to see the FSR 2.0 versus DLSS Quality, just as an image quality comparison with the same baseline, look into my other videos, or to be honest, Digital Foundry, when looking at God of War, has done a better comparison. FSR 2.0 is close. It's better than FSR 1.0, but its image quality is not quite as good as DLSS Quality. But it's, like I said, pretty close. We can see here the performance in this game at 1440p, you know, is certainly a win for the 6600 XT when we look at original versus original. So as we saw in these benchmarks, is there any reason why you would buy the RTX 3050 over the RX 6600 XT? And Performance-wise, I just do not think you can make any argument whatsoever when talking about gaming performance. The only place we saw even a small lead, and it was a small lead, was when looking specifically at ray-traced reflections. Not even just ray tracing in general, but ray-traced reflections. And that was a small lead. And in most games, the ray tracing performance is going to be so low on both of these GPUs that I don't think making your purchasing decision based on the ray tracing performance makes any sense on either of them, because I think the correct decision in almost every ray traced game will be to turn off ray tracing when using either of these GPUs. So what else is there to distinguish them? I mean, Nvidia does have some other advantages. Some people feel like their drivers are a lot more stable, and I've used both, and I will say that I do think Nvidia drivers are a little bit more stable for me personally, but everybody's hardware configuration and the games that they play and all of that are a little bit different. So I didn't run into many nightmare scenarios. I did occasionally have my AMD GPU, like, you know, my screen went black or something like that, but I'm gonna be honest, that didn't happen very often, and it's not that that never happens on my Nvidia GPUs either. In fact, actually, as I was editing this video, well, actually a video right before this one, but basically this type of video on my RTX 3080 in my DaVinci Resolve software, my screen randomly went black and I had to restart my PC. So, you know, it's not like I never have any issues on Nvidia hardware either, but I do feel like I have fewer issues on the Nvidia drivers, but it's not a big deal, and the performance difference here is absolutely insane. So, you know, I wouldn't let that sway me, at least for this extreme of a performance difference. The other thing you might look into is in mentioning, you know, professional productivity software. A lot of professional software is designed to run on NVIDIA, accelerated by NVIDIA CUDA cores, and the AMD support just isn't really there at the same levels, and that depends on what professional program you're talking about. So you know what professional programs you might use. Look into whether they support AMD very well or not. That could be something to look into. The other thing is, I guess, if you're planning on streaming, the NVENC encoder does look a little bit better at low bit rates, like streaming bit rates, than the AMD encoder. Now, in this video, I recorded all the footage using both GPUs, just native encoders, right, through their own driver software. And I think the footage on both of them looks good. Sometimes you can spot small differences, but I'm recording at a much higher bit rate than what you would stream at. So if you're gonna edit videos and upload them to YouTube, you can record at a high enough bit rate that the image quality differences don't really matter. Although we did see, I have a couple of games, especially God of War at 1080p and Marvel's Guardian of the Galaxy at 1080p, where I'm noticing I'm getting a little bit of choppy recordings pretty consistently right now on my AMD GPUs. I don't know why, because it's recording fine on some other games, and even in those same games when I change the resolution. So I don't know if that's some weird interaction with my monitor, maybe? I don't know, because I'm running it on a 4K monitor, but then running the game at 1080p. I have no idea what's causing that issue. I've not been able to iron it out. But anyway, we could, speak that, let that speak to maybe there is, some small software advantages or whatever to the NVIDIA GPU. But I think for the vast majority of people who are just buying this to play games on, the RX 6600 XT absolutely just crushes the 3050. It's not even close. It's a 1080p ultra settings card in even the most demanding titles out there like Cyberpunk. The only thing you can't really turn on is ray tracing. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't. But the 3050 really shouldn't be running that either. The 3050 is already having to make image quality compromises at 1080p on the more demanding games that are already out, let alone games that will be coming out in the future. So, you worry about the longevity of the card without maybe having to rely on DLSS. But as we saw here, when, for example, especially when trying to play it at 1440p, but even at 1080p, oftentimes the 3050, even using DLSS, can't even quite catch up to the native performance of the RX 6600 XT. So, there's really, I'm trying to stretch for reasons why some reasonable person might buy the 3050 instead of the 6600 XT at these current prices, but I really just can't, guys. I don't think the 3050 makes any sense. I think it is by far just the stupidest buy in the Nvidia's current RTX 3000 lineup. I think it's a worse value than something like the 3090 Ti. And my argument there is because even though the 3090 and the 3090 Ti are stupidly expensive, they actually offer a performance level that you can't get elsewhere. Whereas the RTX 3050 doesn't. You can buy a brand new RTX 2060 that actually outperforms it, despite having 2 GB less of VRAM, which I've done a head-to-head in the past. And the RTX 2060 is faster and then has all of those NVIDIA features. So there you go. If you need NVIDIA, just buy the 2060. Although, the 6600 XT is going to be, faster than that if you're just talking gaming performance. So, guys, I think we've just got to call it. The 3050 at its current pricing, not at its MSRP, but at the prices it actually sells for, just has to be the dumbest card. Do you disagree? Let me know in the comment section. Have an excellent day.